Good morning, everybody. I'm Manny Jimenez. I'm the Executive Director of 3IE, the International Initiative for Impact Evaluation. And welcome to Delhi Evidence Week. We in 3IE take these weeks as an opportunity to engage with those who are championing the generation and use of evidence for decisions that affects people's lives in the various places where we have our board meetings and our members conference. And we happen to have one this week, and we'd like to welcome all of you to this event, which I think will be a terrific way for us to exchange ideas and really how to move the frontier forward in this important area. It's great to see many of you whom I've known for many years. I also see a lot of new faces, some of whom may not be totally familiar with 3IE. In fact, some of you may even wonder why you were invited in the first place. 10 years ago, a lot of nasty things happened in 2008. You might recall the stock markets crashed worldwide. In the US, the Dow Jones alone was down in January by 20%, by the middle of the year by 50%. That's half the value. There were two terrible calamities that killed almost 250 million people. The Wenchuan earthquake in Sichuan and Cyclone Nargis in Myanmar. And as you recall, there was a dramatic spike in world food prices, and there were riots in the developing community. But a lot of good things happened too. There was the Beijing Olympics. Bhutan and Nepal transitioned from absolute monarchies to representative democracies. And a relatively young man named Barack Obama was elected president of a large country. But most of all, 3IE was born in 2008, which is, I think, one of the terrific things that you saw in the film. And the film told you about what the journey where we started from and where we are now. And I'd like to just end this introductory remarks by making a few observations of what we in 3IE think are the new challenges going forward. And let me just mention three of them. One is that we believe that we still have a tremendous role to play in filling knowledge gaps. Our repository now contains almost 5,000 impact evaluations that were published since 1980. So and there are a lot more of them than before, but there are still some large gaps in terms of thematic knowledge that needs to be filled. Most of the evaluations that are in our repository are in four sectors: education, health, social protection, and agriculture. There are more gaps in some very important sector where large amounts of money are being spent, such as infrastructure and energy, in areas that cut across everything that the development community does, such as governance, and in themes that affect the global community, such as climate change. And there are very, very relatively few evaluations that are rigorous in those areas. So what this means is that we are challenged, and 3IE is working on methods to make sure that these areas that require us to look at systems, to look at national efforts as opposed to localized efforts are being addressed. And that means complementing the experimental methods that we have known with quasi-experimental and other techniques. Another challenge that we've seen is that tends to be a global focus on where the existing evidence is. Certainly many parts of Latin America, South Asia, India in particular, and some parts of East Africa have a relatively larger number of these evaluations than others. But there are still very large parts of the world that are relatively uncovered, including much of French West Africa, the Middle East and North Africa, and others. And the question is, why might that be? What this implies for us as an evaluation community. These are areas where it'll probably be more expensive to run these evaluations, especially if they're in fragile and conflict-affected states. But this is an area where 3IE will be moving to. And finally, the third thematic area I wanted to mention was that the world is now more focused, not just on the average effect of an intervention, but on how certain groups are being affected by those interventions. The SDGs are very much concerned with ensuring that no one is left behind. What that means for us as evaluators is that we have to make sure we have sample sizes that are large enough to be able to capture what the effects on these subgroups. And again, that means more money, and we have to raise these funds in order to address these equity issues. So that's one, I think, set of challenges that we have, is how to fill in these gaps, and 3IE is committed to doing that. Another set of challenges is in the use and influence. As you saw in the film, 3IE has always been working to ensure that our evaluations aren't just published in the top journals, which we love to see, but that they're also being used in decisions by policymakers and implementers. The challenge for us is that we have to continuously be raising consciousness that this data exists, that it is useful, and also to build capacity, not just for those who generate the information, but those who can potentially use it on how they might be used. We're also challenged to try to even see and monitor the usefulness of our evaluations. We have to find out when they're being used, when decisions are actually taken up as a result of them, and whether we can actually attribute those outcomes in terms of use to the evaluation itself. And again, these are things that 3IE is working on. The last thing I wanted to mention as far as a challenge for us is that as more evidence increases, we in 3IE feel it's our global duty to make sure that the quality of that evidence is as high as possible and it is made available to everyone. This is especially important in a world where, as you know, we're all challenged with other kinds of evidence, sometimes no evidence at all, including fake news and everything else. So we're working very hard on research and transparency because we believe that if we make the research available and transparent, that is certainly one mechanism to ensure that quality is being maintained. These are challenges that are not to be taken lightly, okay? And it's a challenge for all of us as an evaluation community. How hard is it? Well, it's pretty hard. Let me quote John F. Kennedy, who was then trying to convince a very reluctant set of policymakers to invest billions of dollars to go to the moon. And sometimes when we ask donors for funds, it's not quite like that, but it is a challenge. What John F. Kennedy, in a famous speech at Rice University, said was that, let me take my reading glasses out first. Okay. We choose to do these things not because they are easy, but because they are hard. Because that goal will serve to organize and measure the best of our energies and skills. Because that challenge is one that we're willing to accept, one we are unwilling to postpone. I'm not going to compare whether our challenges here are equivalent to those of interstellar exploration. I think they're just different. But I, for one, am convinced that our efforts to improve the lives of poor people especially, by the generation and use of evidence to improve decisions that affect them, is in itself a worthwhile endeavor. And I'm so glad you're here with us to join that effort. Thank you very much.